Jenny Raft, the chairperson. Myself and Tony would like to thank you all for taking the opportunity to join us today. We've got a really exciting webinar that we've designed for you, for our members, to give a deep dive insight into the current state of the Irish travel market, specifically to the US. So I think, we've reiterated this, but on the surface, the Irish visitation to the US has rebounded really, really strongly in Q1 of 23. And basically kind of hitting the same numbers as we had in Q1 2019, which is, incredible. Thinking that we've come out of COVID and the lifting of the travel ban. So just feedback from our airlines and our agency partners is that forward bookings are really, really strong. Yields are higher, people are paying more. Even in the UK, the Barclays index showed that travel was up 34% and transactions booking through travel agencies was up 10%. So really, really positive signs in the market. And today we have two great speakers who are going to cover different aspects of the Irish industry. So first up, we're going to hear from Mark Henry, and he's going to provide a high-level overview of Ireland, looking at the economy, human development, and how the country's transformed over the past 100 years. And then a well-known face is the editor of Air and Travel, Eoghan Corry, and he's going to drill down into details of how the Irish market has recovered following the pandemic and looking at kind of airlift and consumer trends. So I just say the session is booked in for an hour. It may take a little less. Please do answer or ask any questions that you have by typing them in the chat, and myself and Tony will facilitate a Q&A at the end of the session. So first we're going to hear from Mark Henry, as I said. Mark has trained as a psychologist and led the research and strategy functions for Irish technology companies before turning to work in tourism himself. Having spent 2 decades telling people all over the world what a great country Ireland is, with Tourism Ireland, he's passionate about sharing the incredible progress that our country has made through compelling facts and figures. I think you're going to have a really interesting session listening to what Mark has to say. And a shameless plug, and that won't be the first or the last, but Mark is a doctor and is an author of the best-selling book, An Optimistic's Guide to Ireland at 100. So over to you, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Great, Jenny. Thank you. Let me do the sharing the screen thing. There we are. Fantastic. Well, look, thanks a million. Yes, I am a recovering tourism professional. Yes, I worked in Tourism Ireland for 20 years, as Jenny said, telling the world what a great place Ireland was. But now I'm here to tell you, do you really know what Ireland is like today? Well, there's a lot of change. A lot has changed. So this is why I was suggesting to Jenny, to Tony, let's call this Ireland's remarkable progress, this little interlude. A world leader at 100. Why 100? Well, actually, we are 100 years old, just had our birthday. Last December, Ireland was 100 years old as an independent nation, and we've a lot to tell. Now, I'm not actually going to cover the full 100 years, you'd be glad to know, but I'm going to pick up some remarkable things because I love old footage, but this is what Ireland was like 100 years ago. So this footage, I was found, I love it when they find stuff. It was in the basement of the Chicago Academy of Sciences recently. Last year, they uncovered it. It was an American who visited Cork and Kerry in the 1920s. And I mean, hey, it's great to look back at this sort of stuff, but geez, would you want to live there? I don't think so. Whereas today, you would want to live in Ireland because Ireland is the second best place to live on the planet. So says the United Nations. Every year they produce this human development report. And just before COVID, they said, you know what? Ireland is #2 in the world. Okay, we're sharing that with Switzerland, but just behind Norway in terms of the quality of life, human development in the country. You're going to have to Google where the UK and the US sit. They're not in the top 10, right? But hey, really good. And not only that, but we have increased higher. We've increased further up the ranking. We've made greater progress than any other developed nation since they started doing the survey in 1990. So their first report, we were 23rd back in 1990, now all the way up to 2nd. These are just some of the reasons that I said, you know what? People underestimate the positivity. They underestimate the degree of change that has happened in Ireland in recent decades. Most of that, of course, has been since the 90s, most of the progress we've made. Let's all put in a book. So yes, not the last shameless plug for, in fact, An Optimist's Guide to Ireland at 100, which you can find on Amazon.com and many other spots. But it gathers together remarkable facts that demonstrate the progress we've made as a nation. And I'm here to talk about some of them because if we look at why the UN gave us that ranking, what was it that they said Ireland was number 2 on? Well, there's 3 buckets of indicators that they look at quantitatively. So the first one is, do people in that country, so do people in Ireland, live long and healthy lives? Well, actually, we do. We are now amongst the world's longest livers. So in fact, you go back to that video, that little film we saw way back from the 1920s, people in that on average were living 57 years. That was the average lifespan. Now, all the way up to 82. We've added a whole generation. We're literally living 25 years longer than those in 1922. And actually, our lifespan in Ireland is the longest of any European. We are the #1 nation in Europe in terms of longevity. Okay, but are they healthy lives? Well, yes, they are. Again, I'm talking in the book about how there's been dramatic improvements in terms of investment in healthcare. So back in 1970s, on average, the government was spending about €350 in today's money per man, woman, and child in the country. Today, it's over 3,500. Dramatic increase. The population's also grown. So huge increase in spending over that period. And of course, science has moved forward. Yes, we're far able to treat a lot more diseases than we were back in the 1920s, but we're also healthily eating, healthily behaving, if you like, as a population. So we eat twice the amount of vegetables and fruit than the Irish did 60 years ago. So you can see it there in the green. Back in the 1960s, eating roughly 80 kilograms of vegetable and fruit per man, woman, and child. Today, double that. And you can even see eat meat increase significantly, now falling back a bit. But we are healthy eating. Our behaviors are healthier than ever. In fact, the Irish, of course, got that stereotype for alcohol consumption. You only have to look at The Simpsons when they do St. Patrick's Day every year. Anyway, point is, alcohol consumption is on the way down. We're way past peak alcohol consumption in Ireland in the year 2000. So this is the amount of litres of alcohol consumed per person per year in Ireland. In fact, it has now, over COVID, declined further, such that we're down now to 10 litres. So that's well below what it was in the peak. It would be roughly a 40% reduction, right? A third, yeah, close to that over just the last 20 years. So all of that has improved our health, which is why in surveys of European nations, 84% of Irish say that they are healthy, good or very good in terms of their health. It's the highest figure of any European country. You can find the UK in there somewhere as well if you're looking at 73%. So it's self-reported, sure, but overall the Irish are in fact long living and healthy to prove it. So that first bucket that the UN is looking at, do the Irish live long and healthy lives? Absolutely, and far more so than many other places. Okay, second bucket the UN is looking at is to say, all right, what about education? Are people developed in this country? Are they able to contribute personally and fulfill their individual potential? And here there's been dramatic improvement. So firstly, second level education. So those, between the ages, I suppose, of 13 up to 18. So I was in secondary school in the 1980s. That's kind of the second pie chart there. And what's that showing is that 71% of people who went into school in the 1980s stayed all the way through to the end and finished their final examination, the leaving certificate. So 7 in 10. So 3 in 10 didn't. So 3 in 10 did not finish second level education at all, not all the way through to doing that final exam. And you can see how that has crept up decade after decade. Today, it's more than 9 in 10 are seeing there all the way through to second level education. But the types of students in second level has actually transformed radically. In other words, back in the 1980s, there was nobody with special needs getting any second level education in Ireland. Now that's standard. So there's a whole group of people who are being educated now who weren't even being educated at all back then. But we've increased, as you can see, the quantity of people who are staying through in second level and quality. At least we measure quality by pupil-teacher ratios. The pink is showing this huge decline in the amount of students that every teacher had to teach at primary level. The blue is a second level, at the lowest level ever. A huge chunk of that is providing education for those special needs kids who were never dealt with before. But only last week, global figures came out for reading ability worldwide at primary level. And the Irish were the second best. The Irish kids, second best after those in Singapore in terms of their quality of reading. So first level education, second level education, huge improvements in quality and quantity. But it's actually a third level where there's been this dramatic improvement, the amount of people in higher education. So I went on to do psychology in UCD, University College Dublin, left in the early 90s. So you can see there, 1990, 13% of working age adults had some form of higher education, degree, diploma, whatever. Today, it's the majority. Today, the majority of working age adults today have a third level qualification. That is true of only one other nation in Europe, Luxembourg, and it's true of Canada, Singapore, and that's about it. I think South Korea also. So we're well up there in terms of, again, amongst the most highly educated peoples on the planet. So the second bucket that the UN is looking at, are people, are they able to develop themselves to fill their potential? Absolutely, in Ireland, far more so than elsewhere. Okay. The third thing the UN then says is, all right, what about the physical standard of living? Are people reasonably wealthy and able to live well in this country? Well, this is the favorite chart I have from my book, in fact, An Optimist's Guide to Ireland at 100, because this does show the 100 years, and this shows wealth in Ireland per capita, stripping out inflation, so in constant terms, all the way from the 1920s, all the way up to essentially before COVID. And the green line, of course, is Ireland. And you can see, go back to the 1920s, you can see there the UK in blue, the US in red. So on average, the standard of living in Ireland in the 1920s was roughly 60% that of the UK, roughly 40% that of the US. And look at that gap, it stayed. I mean, it's barely any improvement in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s began to edge up. I mean, Ireland was not a wealthy place. As the other countries grew, proportionally, we stayed the same. We didn't really catch up all the way to the 1990s. And then we had the Celtic Tiger, huge economic growth in Ireland, export-led, that delivered huge increases in our GDP per capita, passing the UK 1996, up there with the US by 2003, and now ahead. Now, today, Irish are very experts. The Irish people are very expert. GDP includes all sorts of multinational activity. We don't really talk about that. We use GNP or GNI, there are all sorts of different measures to strip out the multinationals and say, well, actually, what's the impact of the Irish economy as a whole? If you were to take out all those wonderful profits that Facebook makes and the continent of Europe brings them here, pays tax here, and then ships them back to the US. But the point is, look at the shape of that. People who say, oh, well, that's not real. That growth isn't real. That's not, in modern days, at least, that's impacted by multinationals. Yes, but look at that shape of that graph. Point is, that perfectly mirrors employment in Ireland. So this GDP growth has translated into real and genuine benefits for people in Ireland. I go right back again to the 1920s, the previous graph. 1920, there were roughly 1.1 million people in employment in Ireland. That's how many jobs there were in the 1920s, 1.1 million. And in the 1930s and in the 1940s. Same in the 50s, same in the 60s, same in the 70s, same in the 80s. There was no increase whatsoever in employment in Ireland all the way until we began to see that increase in the 90s. You can see there how the graph began to take off. Employment doubled in less than 20 years through that Celtic Tiger era. Fell back a bit in the Great Recession, reached new highs pre-COVID, fell back a bit in COVID. And now the latest figures are showing more than 2.5 million people employed. We have never had so many people in jobs in Ireland. And of course, the nature of those jobs has changed. Again, go back to that pre-Celtic Tiger era, before we had that huge boom in exports of multinationals. This shows how many jobs are classified as low-skilled or medium-skilled or high-skilled. The point is, in the 80s, the high-skilled jobs were the smallest share. Now, they're the biggest share. And of a much greater number, more than twice as many people in employment. High-skilled jobs, again, a lot of that driven by the multinational sector, a lot of that driven by the higher education levels that we saw earlier. It's a huge transformation in terms of employment. And that has meant that Ireland has changed from being traditionally, of course, a country of emigrants, outward flows, to one of inward flows. So, of course, again, go back to the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, no more jobs. So where were the people going? Of course, they were leaving. They were leaving the country to get employment. That's what the red shows there in the 1950s, the 60s. It's estimated that up to a third of people in their 20s and 30s in the 50s just left Ireland. No jobs, right? A little bit of growth, economic challenges in the 80s, but really, again, as the economy took up there, as we saw that from the 1990s on, huge inward flows of people into the country to feed these high-skilled jobs that we were looking for. A bit of a fallback, of course, in the Great Recession, but back in positive territory, reaching new highs. And that has fundamentally changed Ireland. We have never been more multicultural. This is the percentage of people living here today who were born somewhere else. Well, I say living here today. You can see in the 50s and 60s, sure, it was 4%, 3%. A lot of those are people who were born in England. It might have been kids of people who emigrated and then they came back. No, it wasn't really much a multicultural country. You can see the growth. And again, from the 90s, late 90s, as there began to be this huge inward flow of people for those jobs. So the numbers shot up. We just had the latest census figures last week. It's hit 20%. So 20% of people living in Ireland today were born elsewhere. That's the highest figure in Europe, other than Luxembourg. They're tiny. But yeah, aside from them, we are the biggest in Europe. It's actually a figure that's higher than the UK, higher than the US today, in terms of percentage of population born elsewhere. So Ireland, quite different place in quite a short period of time, real transformation in 2 decades. So the economic boats have risen. It has benefited people in jobs. It has benefited people in incomes. It has brought people here for economic opportunity. And we have managed to make the country more equal as that economy has developed. So income inequality in Ireland has decreased. It was at the lowest level recorded pre-COVID. The trend is downwards, and our inequality here is far less than elsewhere. So they measure it with this Gini coefficient thing. It shows, the percent, 100% would mean that all the wealth is owned by one person. 0 means that it's equally distributed across everyone and we're living in communism. But look, the point is, equality in Ireland is better than the EU average. It's below, we're more equal than Germany and France these days, and we're touching on Nordic levels, which is good. So that second bucket you see, or that third bucket I should say, that the UN was talking about, is there a good quality of standard living in Ireland? It's never been better. So you can see why they put us second in the world, in fact, when you look at quality of life. But of course, there are other things they're not measuring. A lot of that is other great news to report. Ireland's impact on the world, for example. Did you know we are amongst, let's say we are the world leaders in English literature? Yes, why? Because we've won more Booker Prizes and more Nobel Prizes literature per capita than any other country, per capita. But still, for the size of our country, see the list there, no one else has won more Nobel Prizes and Booker Prizes. It's literature, it's acting. This is slightly harder to believe, but it is true that Irish actors have won more Oscars than those from any other nation per capita. So for the size of our country, these 3 people, and I'm counting Daniel Day-Lewis, he's got an Irish passport, I'm counting him, doesn't matter, he's born in the UK, he's Irish. So those 3 people between them have won more Oscars per capita for Ireland than, yes, America, and yes, Britain and elsewhere. So we've brought acting talents to the world. We brought literature talents to the world. Yes, we've brought drinking, Irish pubs. What would you say? Hospitality, conviviality. That's our strength. We brought that to the world, of course. The number of Irish pubs per continent. This isn't even the proper list. This isn't even a full list. This is just the members of Irish Hospitality Global, because that's kind of like the Irish pub network. But this is definitely not even the full North American pubs. Those of you who are there, no, there are definitely more than 1,700 Irish pubs in America when you think about it, North and, as in Canada and the States. So absolutely, this is an underestimate, but a huge bit of Ireland's contribution to the world. So of course, people want us to travel. We've got lots of good reasons to get out there. And in fact, our passport is there for one of the most widely accepted in the world. We're 11th in this ranking, changes a little bit all the time. Henley and partners update this every quarter, but we're always there in the top 10, top 15 in the world in terms of the number of destinations we can access without a prior visa, right up there. So people love to see us coming, and we're coming in greater numbers than we ever have done before. Everyone in Ireland now takes a foreign holiday, on average, right? So the point is, not very long ago, 1992, you can see there, on average, the amount of holidays that were taken outbound from Ireland as a proportion of the population, 1 in 5. So literally 1 in 5 people in early 1990s was traveling overseas, traveling internationally for a holiday break. I have to thank Ryanair. Huge growth in the 1980s in terms of outbound into 2000s. You can see the huge growth. By 2007, on average, everyone was taking a foreign holiday. Before COVID, there were more foreign holidays taken than there were people in Ireland. So huge growth as an outbound travel market. And Eoghan will give you the latest shortly and tell us whether we are back to 2019 levels or on track to be or not. So huge transformation of Ireland in a relatively short period, as of course that wealth impacted and was shared and access to the world opened up for us. So aren't we a happy lot? Surely we must be some of the happiest people on the planet too. Yeah, yes, we are. We are. People tend to read the media and think, oh, everything's terrible, there's challenges. Yeah, but wait a minute. When asked, are you satisfied with life today, fairly or very? In Ireland, more than 90% of people say they are fairly or very satisfied with their lives. In fact, the very most recent data, I looked it up last week from the early part of this year, it's 96%. Now, of course, we all want to win the lotto. Yes, of course, we want to retire to the Caribbean and have that little island. Yes, of course. But on balance, people can recognize the improvements that they've seen in their lives. Yes, of course, there's lots of challenges still facing us. Of course there is. But overall, we have never had it so good. Why? What has Ireland done right? What are the 4 factors, I argue, in the book that have enabled Ireland's success? Very simply, 4 things that have helped our little flower to grow. It should be a shamrock, but anyway, there it is. First point is stability, by which I mean we are one of only a dozen nations that have been a democracy unbroken for a century. Unbroken democracy for a century. Yes, the US is one and the UK one, but of course a lot of European countries, of course, and elsewhere not the case. So we've had this stable nation. We built good institutions of state. We don't have a very polarized political system. It isn't swinging to the far left or the far right. So we've got good institutional capital in Ireland. That's encouraged inward investment, for example. We have then a very good sense of community. We have very strong levels of trust in Ireland, amongst the highest. When they do these European surveys, Irish people very strongly trusting, not a polarized society, not a sense of them and us. We have an electoral system which brings the politicians quite close to the people. There is a good sense of community. There is a good sense of social capital. We've built good reserves of social capital in Ireland. So that stability and that community is kind of the fertile soil. And then you water it with education. I mean, that huge transformation in education I talked about earlier is obviously transformative in terms of bringing in inward investment, in terms of allowing Irish people to fulfill their potential. And that's human capital. And last but not least, our openness to the world. The first part of Irish history, and I showed you some of the graphs in the 1920s, no growth, is when we tried to close ourselves off to the world and said, no, we need to be independent from the UK, so we're going to do everything ourselves, we're going to become self-sufficient. Too small for that arc. That didn't work at all. It was when we joined the EU 50 years ago this year, and when we joined and learned, we began to trade internationally, began to look beyond the UK as a source of export growth, that we began to say, wow, actually there's a whole new world open to us here. And openness to bring in investment, to bring in the talent, the people that we need, that has transformed Ireland as well. That has been critical to our success, I suggest. So look, in the book, I talk about some of the challenges. Of course, it's not a perfect nation. And I talk also about some of the psychological biases that blind us to this positive progress, because that's not what you're hearing on the radio or on the newspaper or on your social media feed. I know that's true of every country. There are psychological biases that encourage us to look for the negative. Okay, but our future is bright based on the last few decades. It has been remarkable. Reflect factfully on what Ireland has achieved. It has been extraordinary. We've never been healthier. We've never been wealthier. We've never been better educated. Actually, never been happier. That's true. So huge improvements in the country in recent decades. And we know what the foundations are for our success. I'm arguing those 4 factors. We need to nurture those to successfully address the challenges ahead. Of course, there are challenges today. It's nowhere perfect on planet Earth, but we're pretty good. That's what the UN says. We're pretty good up those rankings. We know what we need to continue to invest in to continue to develop ourselves into the future. So spread the good word. There's plenty of good words to spread. In fact, take a leaf out of my book. In fact, I don't really mind what you do with it once you buy a copy online. But listen, there's a great story to be told about Ireland, and plenty of people with the money and the interest and the willingness to travel. So plenty of opportunity this year and in the coming years. Thanks for the opportunity to tell you about it.
Thank you, Mark. That was really, really interesting. And I suppose the key for our members, what they can take out of that session is that we are living longer, we're wealthier, we're a more diverse nation, with more propensity to travel. So this is kind of gives a real good insight in how we can market your products, your destinations to the Irish consumer, and looking at that kind of age profile and consumer buying habit. And just, I suppose, to point out when you're talking about, the purchasing of holidays, we are ranked number 1 globally for visitation per capita to the US. So we're small, we're mighty, we're rich, and we want to travel. So it's all good. What's not to be happy about that? So thank you so much, Mark. Next up, we're going to hear from Eoghan Corry. Eoghan is a a leading travel commentator in Ireland, a great friend to the Irish travel industry, as well as being a historian, an author, and a broadcaster. He's extremely well traveled. He's always traveling. God knows where you are today, Eoghan. He's a journalist, a travel writer, and a speaker and moderator of tourism and aviation conferences across Europe, the US, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Formerly, he was features and literary editor at the Irish Press and sports editor at the Sunday Tribune, and is author of more than 40 books. So, Mark, you've got a catching up to do there. And his books are all on travel, history, and his own biography. So that is definitely one I'm going to buy on. So over to you. And we're delighted you could join us today.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Jenny. And it's lovely to see so many of my great friends joining us here today. I'm going to rattle through fairly quickly an overview economically of what is been happening in the last year or so, and its relationship to travel, the selling of travel to the United States, and also the system, how it will affect the availability of those routes, those choices that we make when we're given these opportunities to travel. First of all, worldwide, most economies look like they're going to avoid recession. Inflation is falling back. The risk of recession in the main global economies is abating. Modest growth now expected almost right across every major economy in 2023. The exception is Britain, which is underperforming. We have a lot of people from Britain here who will need an open explanation for that. Policy errors still possible. Central banks could be underestimating the time lag of the hikes and tighten a little bit too much. That's a bit of that going on. Sticky core inflation, tight labour markets, they may necessitate higher rates. That risks recession when it happens, and the geopolitical, we can't escape it every day in the radio, television, newspapers, with the war in Ukraine. Oil, European gas prices, they surged after Russia invaded Ukraine, but they've fallen back considerably since last summer, and very tight labour markets as unemployment falls to multi-decade lows across all economies. Interest rates, much higher than anticipated a year ago, but they're expected to peak mid-2023, remain high, but unlikely to go that much higher after that. The dollar, big question. Some of you will have been when at IPW in San Antonio. I think one of our party paid $79 for its breakfast, which comes to 73 euro. Now, what happened last year was the dollar benefited from a perfect storm, higher US rates, geopolitical tensions, risk aversion. It's lost ground since the autumn, particularly the early part of this year, as other central banks accelerated the rate hikes. It looked like the tide had been turned a little bit. It has rolled back just that little bit over the last 4 or 5 weeks. The euro benefited recently from rising ECB rates and a significant fall in European natural gas prices, but it isn't as good as it should be. We have a technical recession in the Eurozone that was announced this morning. So dollar is going to be high for a little bit. Britain, our third biggest trading partner, and it's really important to the Irish economy. We sometimes forget how important it still is. Third biggest trading partner, and very important for our airline industry. It has been underperforming. Sterling way down, concerns over the British economy behind that, hit a record low against the dollar in 2022, and it's weakened against the euro with concerns about the prospects for the UK economy. Much bigger decline of 11% in Britain GDP in 2020 during the pandemic than elsewhere. It's not returned to pre-COVID levels of activity, in contrast to all the other G7 economies. Marked fall in trade with the European Union in the aftermath of Brexit, which also weighed in on investment, and the OECD estimate that weaker external trade knocked 2% off Britain's GDP over 21-22. So Brexit is dampening the labour supply, lower immigration from the European Union, a fall in the participation rate, a big hit to real household disposable income, tightening of monetary and fiscal policy, public sector strikes. There's 33 days of strikes planned in the airports this summer, So they are have a little bit of a headwind for output growth in 2023 and the risk of contraction in 2023 and the GDP. That's haunting everything, all those figures. The IMF sees UK GDP growth at minus 0.6% in 2023. The Bank of England says 0.5% and the OECD has 0.4%, but all of those figures are minus. And hopefully growth return to positive territory 2024 if with a fall in inflation. But there's concern also at the surge, the deficit of 5% of GDP in 2022 and higher energy prices, which are still working their way through the economy. Ireland's buoyancy, this is the more recent trend and what Mark has been talking about. GDP increases were quite spectacular, 13.6% in 2021 and 12% 2022. We won't be expecting that. The domestic economy grew by 5.8% in 2021, 8.2% in 2022. A big inflow of foreign direct investment. The three pillars of the Irish economy, as most people will know, are pharmaceutical, software and agri-food. All of them perversely did quite well during the pandemic, and we've got a big surge of foreign direct investment as an afterthought of that, and was a big factor in the rapid growth of the economy 2021-22. High levels of fiscal support for household and businesses that also kept the economy strong during that period. Consumer spending up 6.6% in 2022, 11.5% increase in spending on services. Investment was up 20%, colossal figure, but buoyant business investment. House building, a big problem during the pandemic, recovered up 45% in 2022 off a low base. Transport hospitality output 14.4% up, but still the slowest, and nobody in the travel industry needs reminding of this, the slowest to come back to 2019 levels, still 4.5% below. Service exports up 7.3% in 2022, 10.3% in 2021. Employment now 9.2% above its end 2019 pre-COVID level. 102,700 jobs created in the year to 2023. Those figures came out last week. That is the record since the current system of recording them was introduced in 1998. The labour force also grew 9% in the past 3 years. The best since the labour force survey began in 1998. The recent results should say. Big influx of non-EU workers accounted for 49,000 of 53,000 growth in the labour force in 2022, and solid growth expected in the Irish economy 2023, 2024, perhaps not double digit, but we're certainly looking at further growth of 6 or 7% if all goes well. There's a couple of things we have to watch. Capacity constraints. That does look like being the main worry about putting a brake on all of that. The foreign direct foreign direct investment inflows continuing, a good pipeline for 2023. But the tech sector is undergoing a little bit of a downturn. You can see the wobbles through that, and they're very big employers, are very big important sources of foreign direct investment. Fiscal policy supportive of growth, budget allowing 5-6% rise in core government spending in 2023-2024. The economy is deleveraged. We've got low private sector debt. We had a 44% surge in private sector deposits during 2020 to 2022. People who didn't spend during the pandemic, a lot of them looking into the travel sector for that spending, for that money that they've saved, looking for higher value trips. Sharp flat rise in inflation and a slower global growth are significant headwinds to watch out for, and capacity constraints. We don't need any reminder that very well covered. Housing, labour, finding staff, and also affordable housing for the staff that are coming to Ireland. Electricity, water, infrastructure, planning laws, a little bit of a drag in that, most spectacularly evident in the fact that we've 6,000 car parking spaces near Dublin Airport that can't be used at the moment. GDP growth growth, it was 12%. As I say, it's going to come down. What are the forecasts? 5.5% in 2023 and 5% in 2024. Still astonishing figures going back a few years, but a little bit below that very, very high figures we've coming off at the moment. More moderate growth rates then will be expected for the modified domestic demand that we'll have at 23, 24, those capacity constraints. The global economy, a little bit more resilient than expected. Almost everything produced in Ireland is exported. So we're very wed to what happens globally. So a very strong Irish economy, continuing good growth, likely robust household and business balance sheets with high levels of saving coming off the pandemic, still a strong pent-up demand for travel, service sectors outperforming with the travel industry seeing a strong recovery, sharp falls in wholesale energy prices, and they're going to feed through much lower headline inflation, hopefully through 2023, and the EU harmonised index of consumer prices shows that we're 5.4% in the 12 months to May 2023. Inflation still a concern, but the pace of it is slowing down ever so slightly. And then the challenges, slower growth, capacity constraints, as I mentioned, shortage of labour, big reliance on non-EU workers who require work visas. You can't go through Dublin without hearing Portuguese being spoken at the moment. The high cost and the scarcity of accommodation for employees, discouraging workers from overseas. Core inflation likely to remain sticky with upward pressure on wages. Moving to a higher interest rate environment that has implications for spend, for not just that people are paying more for their mortgages, but also that they're worried that the rates might hike again, and there is a likelihood that rates will hike again. And then, as I say, Britain weighing heavily on our growth because it's such a strong trading partner. Sterling expected to remain a weak currency, which will weigh on, for instance, tourist numbers, visitor numbers coming into Ireland. Dublin Airport. Good news, lots of interesting developments there this year, which are big implications for us. The numbers are close to 2019, not quite sure we'll make 2019, but they're certainly ahead of what was anticipated. Even a few weeks before Easter, they were anticipating that it would be lower. And the reason is that the people are booking incredibly late. That's abated a little bit in the last 3 months, but people were booking insanely late during the winter, largely because of the uncertainty that had accompanied travel over the previous 3 years. There is the figure of 3.5 million passengers in May was just announced. It's pretty close to 2019 levels. Shannon reported their busiest day in 7 years. So there is an element of the aviation industry and the travel industry coming back to 2019. Not sure we'll exceed 2019 this year, but we're getting most of the way there. And there, from the airport experience, very significant from Visit USA point of view, is that second security check. You come down the stairs in Dublin Airport, the security check is being phased out for some of the flights, and it looks like it'll be, they're testing it at the moment. That's where you have to take put your bags through another scanner. It slows down things considerably. It had its own security queues of 40 to 50 minutes last summer, and it looks like it'll be phased out completely in the autumn. Leaving the laptops and liquids in the bag, another big step forward. There are 5, I think this week they're bringing the 6th scanner that can allow you to leave the laptop and liquid in the bag. 3 of them are in Terminal 2, which is our US flights. Part of our summer US flights go from Terminal 1, but the 3 in each of the terminals. The likelihood is that all of Terminal 2 will have the new scanner. They're going to not introduce any more of them during the summer because they're testing it. They're going to go through the peak period, and then in the autumn, Terminal 2 will be completely, all the security lanes will have the new scanners. You can leave your laptop and liquid in the bag. Great news for all of us. The big challenge of the summer, very, very well covered, car parking. It's all to do with that quick park, the privately owned car park on the Santry Road, 6,000 spaces sitting there. Dublin Airport say they can get it up and running in a week if they get the clearances to do so, and the competition commissioner. The top 10 from Dublin Airport, some of you will have seen it, they released the top 10 destinations this week, and very very interesting that we have, after Malaga and Faro and Barcelona, which are all predictable, Chicago was number 4, and this is by numbers and bookings. We're looking forward to the summer. Paris, Lisbon, then New York, then Boston, then Madrid, then Lanzarote. So 3 North American destinations in the top 10. The flights to USA, we had 189 every week in 2019. We're back to 183, so pretty close, and a lot of interesting equipment on that. Atlanta's 7 Delta per week using the A350. The Boston Aer Lingus have the double daily A330 Delta, have a Boeing 76. And Charlotte, the American, have the Boeing 77. Chicago, again, an A330 route for Aer Lingus, and American using the Dreamliner 78 on that, and United using the 757. Dallas, another Dreamliner route from American, and that's gone year round. Hartford, great to see that back. That's an A321 from Aer Lingus. Cleveland, newly announced. Jenny's just back from there. The 321 again. The 333 for Los Angeles, 7 daily flight. The New York is the oldest of Aer Lingus's routes, the 330. Delta have a 76 on that. Aer Lingus have a 321 in Newark, and United have a 75 and 777 on some of those. Orlando's 4 times weekly Aer Lingus 330 route. Aer Lingus the 321 in Philadelphia. American of the 78 on it. San Francisco the 330 for an Aer Lingus daily. Seattle the 330 daily, and then Washington 330 double daily from Aer Lingus. United have the 767. What's going to happen next? We're going to see probably expansion on that. I'm just back from Istanbul from the IATA conference, and very interesting. Lynn Embleton was there. A lot of the talks that people were having with Aer Lingus are about the Manchester services. We got Orlando particularly looking for expansion of Manchester, Orlando. This is what's been lost since 2019. The Los Angeles Ethiopian, I think it went a little bit before that. Minneapolis, which was supposed to, it was a 321 route, and then the 2 Norwegian routes, which were Stewart, that lovely airport in upstate New York. You virtually land on top of the best shopping locations in North America there, and Providence, Rhode Island. But the big development we're going to be watching next is where the 321 XLRs that Aer Lingus are getting will go, because there's 6 of them on their way, and there's delivery start in 2024, and that brings places like Denver into play. That brings most of the all the way over to the West Coast into, almost all the way over to the West Coast into play for those thinner routes that will be served by the 321. And Aer Lingus would traditionally, were before the pandemic, we're talking about 3 new destinations a year. Be lovely to see them back in that area. I'm not sure that we're going to get back to that area. Canada, also relevant to us today, with 39 flights a week. The big aviation news in the USA is that we saw very little investment in American airports until quite recently, but JFK and LAX both have seen big investments, and we have things like a train service that's going to connect Orlando with the holiday destinations. That's coming in September. A few headwinds there as well. Staffing shortages, air traffic control, airlines will be asked, or they are being asked already, to reduce capacity. So that could put a little bit of a brake on the plans for expansion. And we also have price developments, such as American charging for checked bags and all of those sort of things. They're all the sort of things that we're very familiar with in aviation, the turbulence of aviation and the extra passenger charges we've seen in recent years. And the big significant development of a little bit more than peripheral interest to us here in Ireland is that the stamped entry to and from Europe is going to be replaced. That should boost passenger traffic from the United States, not immediately relevant to the common travel area, which is Ireland and Britain, but as we all know, services like Cleveland, Seattle, places like that depend very heavily on connecting traffic. So it does look like there'll be, with the strength of the dollar and a rush of that connecting traffic, that there will be more, it'll be easier for American inbound passengers to come to Europe as of next year, whenever that's introduced. But how does that impact those of us who are sending visitors to the United States? It means more routes are viable. Aer Lingus's model is quite clearly to turn Dublin into a hub and to use those fantastic new aircraft that they're getting next year to open up routes which would never ever have happened with point-to-point traffic purely from Dublin. So I'm very happy to join or open the discussion. It's Tony as chair to open the discussion and answer any questions that any of you have. And it's lovely to see, as I say, so many of my great friends here today, or even see you is allegorical. I just see your names in front of me, but even that is cheering me up no end.
Eoghan, thank you so much. I think we could listen to you all day. We really, really could. That was so informative. I think the things that I took out of that was just looking at consumer spend being up 6.6%, that the pent-up demand is still there for the US. Interesting to know that Chicago was the #1 US destination, so great to hear. And that, you know, we're back to 183 flights per week. So someone did ask, were they direct services out of Dublin? And yes, they are. So if we look at kind of the connectivity onwards through the US hubs, and I know we have some of our airline partners online, like Aoife's here from United and so on, like it's absolutely incredible when you look at the volume going through Dublin Airport. And it's great for you to touch on the developments at the airport. And I know we have Del Redmond on, and she's going to be joining us in our next session. So it'll be great to hear how that second screening test phase is going throughout the summer and all that great news to allow guests to travel from Dublin and through Dublin and into North America. So just a massive thank you. That was really, really insightful. So I'll hand over to Tony if he has any questions in the chat box, or if anybody has any questions they'd like to pose to Eoghan or Mark. I think Mark is still online as well.
Okay, we don't have any questions apart from if we can get a copy of the presentation, and yes, we'll make a copy of the recording and the presentations available for the participants.
And you could buy Mark's book as well, you know, that will keep us well.
And you have to send us the list of your 40.
Just to give a bit of context on Jenny's airline, only the airline that is running more transatlantic services on Saturdays during the summer is British Airways. You know,
Tara's on. Sorry, apologies, Tara's on as well. Yeah.
We tend to forget how, a non-American airline, we tend to forget how important Aer Lingus is to North America, even in terms of the slot allocations at JFK. They're one of the major airlines. The reason being that after we were supposed to open in 1948, but we did eventually open transatlantic in 1958 and developed those. They were completely dependent on point-to-point in those days. The ethnic market was really important to us, but Aer Lingus has a long, very long historical connection with particularly the three airports, Boston, Chicago, New York. And when it comes to the number of flights crossing the Atlantic that you'll see in Flight Radar 24, they're the only airline that is operating, non-American airline that's operating more is British Airways. So that again is something that as Irish people we probably don't appreciate enough. Of course, it's great to see the American, such a huge interest in American, and we have three routes each from United, Delta and American, and getting that year-round service to Dallas was a terrific achievement as well. And of course, Canada, we've 21 flights daily into Toronto, which is a big connecting destination into all the way down to Florida, places like that.
Yeah. That was great. That was so insightful. Just on behalf of the members and the committee, thank you both so much for joining us today. I think we all got a huge amount out of that. So really, really positive news. So thank you both.
Always a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.